A kind waitress served coffee to the rudest customer she'd ever encountered. Hours later, she saw his face on the news as a dangerous fugitive worth millions in reward money. What she remembered from their encounter would change everything and put her life in danger. The fluorescent lights of Riverside Diner hummed their constant electric song, casting harsh white light over cracked red vinyl booths and a checkerboard floor that had seen better decades. The smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease hung perpetually in the air, mixing with the metallic scent of rain that had been falling steadily all evening, turning the parking lot into a mirror reflecting neon signs and headlights. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday, the dead zone between dinner rush and morning breakfast prep, when only insomniacs and people running from something sought refuge in all-night diners. Behind the counter, wiping down surfaces that would never truly be clean, stood Maya Rodriguez, working the graveyard shift because it paid an extra $1 per hour. And that dollar meant the difference between making rent and eviction. And sitting at the corner booth, nursing his third cup of coffee while radiating hostility that kept other customers at a distance, was a man whose face would soon be plastered across every news channel in the state. Before this story takes you into what happened that night, pause for just a moment. If you believe in trusting your instincts, in the thin line between courage and danger, and in the way ordinary people sometimes find themselves in extraordinary situations, please like this video, share it with someone who appreciates real suspense, and subscribe to Untold Kindness Journey. Your support helps us tell stories that prove reality can be more intense than any thriller. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pay attention to details others miss. Maya had been working at Riverside Diner for 2 years, putting herself through nursing school one exhausting shift at a time. At 26, she'd developed the waitress instincts that let her read customers before they opened their menus, knowing who would tip well and who would leave change counting pennies, who wanted conversation, and who wanted to be invisible. The man in the corner booth had walked in just after 11, his clothes expensive but somehow wrong, like a costume rather than natural choice. Dark jeans, black jacket, baseball cap pulled low despite being indoors. He'd chosen the booth furthest from windows and doors, positioning himself where he could see the entire diner while remaining partially hidden. His behavior had been strange from the start. When Maya approached with her standard greeting and a pot of coffee, he'd barely looked at her, his voice sharp and dismissive. "Just coffee, black. Keep it coming." "No, please, no thank you." Just commands delivered like she was an appliance rather than a person. Throughout the evening, he'd been on his phone constantly, speaking in hushed tones that carried tension even when words couldn't be heard, checking the door every time it opened, his body language screaming discomfort and alertness. Maya had dealt with rude customers before, had learned to let their behavior roll off without taking it personally, but something about this man felt different, felt wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. She'd refilled his coffee 4 times, each interaction brief and cold. He never made eye contact, never acknowledged her beyond grunts and nods, treating her like furniture that happened to pour beverages. Once, when she'd accidentally brushed his table while reaching for his cup, he'd recoiled violently, his hand moving to his jacket pocket in a gesture that made her instincts scream danger, even though she couldn't explain why. She'd apologized quickly and backed away, her heart racing, some primitive part of her brain recognizing threat, even when her conscious mind tried to dismiss it as paranoia. Around midnight, the man had finally left, throwing a $20 bill on the table without waiting for change, walking quickly to a dark sedan parked at the edge of the lot, where shadows were deepest. Maya had watched him go, feeling relief wash over her like cool water, grateful to have that particular energy out of her space. She'd cleared his table, pocketed the generous tip despite his rudeness because money was money, and tried to shake off the unease that lingered like smoke after fire. Just another strange customer in a job full of them, she told herself. Nothing more, nothing worth dwelling on. Her shift ended at 6 in the morning, and Maya drove home through streets still wet from overnight rain, planning to sleep for a few hours before her afternoon nursing class. She'd stopped at a convenience store for coffee, the irony of a waitress buying coffee not lost on her, and while paying, she'd glanced at the small television mounted behind the counter. The morning news was on, and what she saw made the blood drain from her face, and her hands start trembling so badly she nearly dropped her change. The man from the diner stared back at her from the screen, his face filling the frame above a caption that read, armed and dangerous. The news anchor's voice cut through her shock with words that made her knees weak. Marcus Delgado, wanted in connection with 3 armed robberies and the shooting of a security guard during a bank heist last week, is believed to be in the area. Police consider him extremely dangerous and are offering a $50,000 reward for information leading to his arrest. If you see this man, do not approach him. Contact authorities immediately. The image changed to show the same expensive watch she'd noticed on the rude customer's wrist, the same dark jacket, the same angular face that had refused to meet her eyes. Maya stood frozen in the convenience store, her mind racing through every detail of the previous night. She'd served coffee to a fugitive. She'd been within arm's reach of someone dangerous enough to shoot a security guard. And, more terrifying, he'd been agitated, constantly checking his phone, clearly waiting for something or someone. She thought about calling the police immediately, but another part of her brain, the part that had developed through years of watching people and reading situations, told her to be careful, to think this through, because the man had seemed not just dangerous but desperate, and desperate people did unpredictable things. She drove home in a daze, her hands shaking on the steering wheel, her mind replaying every moment of their interaction. When she'd brushed his table, his hand had gone to his jacket pocket. Had there been a gun there? When he'd left money and walked quickly to his car, had he been planning something? The dark sedan parked where cameras wouldn't catch it, the constant phone calls in hushed tones, the choice of the corner booth where he could watch exits. Everything that had seemed merely strange last night now carried sinister weight in light of what she knew. At home, Maya paced her small apartment, the television on in the background repeating the same news story every 15 minutes. The reward money flashed on screen, $50,000, more money than she'd make in 2 years at the diner, enough to pay off her nursing school debt and buy a reliable car and maybe stop living paycheck to paycheck. But taking that money meant potentially putting herself in danger if Marcus Delgado somehow learned she'd reported him. It meant testifying, possibly, means being connected to whatever violence he'd committed or might still commit. Her phone sat on the kitchen table like a weight, the decision pressing down on her with physical force. The news mentioned that police believed Delgado was planning to flee the state. That time was critical, that he might be meeting accomplices to help him disappear. Maya thought about the security guard he'd shot, about that person's family, about other potential victims if he wasn't caught. She thought about the $50,000 and what it could mean for her future. But mostly she thought about the moment he'd recoiled when she touched his table, the violence in that reaction, the barely controlled aggression that had radiated from him all night. Finally, Maya made her decision. She picked up her phone and called the police tip line, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She gave them detailed information about Marcus Delgado's appearance at the diner, the time he'd arrived and left, a description of his vehicle, including a partial license plate she'd unconsciously memorized while watching him leave. She told them about his behavior, the phone calls, the way he'd positioned himself to watch the exits, details that might help law enforcement predict his next move. The operator asked if she'd be willing to provide a formal statement, and Maya agreed despite her fear, understanding that some situations required courage, even when courage felt like walking toward danger, rather than away from it. Within hours, her tip combined with other evidence led police to a motel where Marcus Delgado was arrested without incident, caught before he could flee the state or hurt anyone else. The arrest made the evening news, and while Maya's name was kept confidential for her protection, she received confirmation that she'd be receiving the $50,000 reward. The money was life-changing, everything she'd hoped for. But Maya found the real satisfaction came from something less tangible, from knowing she'd paid attention when it mattered, had trusted her instincts about danger, and had chosen to act despite her fear. The experience changed how Maya moved through the world. She became more aware of her surroundings, more conscious of the details people unconsciously revealed through behavior and body language. She finished nursing school with the reward money covering her debt, and in her eventual career, she found that same attention to detail, that same instinct for reading people, made her exceptionally good at recognizing when patients were in distress before obvious symptoms appeared. The night she served coffee to Marcus Delgado became a story she told rarely and carefully, A reminder that ordinary moments can contain extraordinary danger. That kindness to difficult people doesn't mean ignoring warning signs, and that sometimes the universe puts you exactly where you need to be to make a difference. So even when that place is a graveyard shift at a diner serving coffee to someone who'd rather you didn't exist.